My 41st wedding anniversary was on a Tuesday in October. My husband forgot. My daughter didn't mention it. My son texted to ask if I could babysit that weekend. I sat at the dinner table that evening and felt something I had not expected. Not sadness. Clarity. I had spent 41 years making myself as easy as possible to be around. Agreeable, accommodating, never too much trouble, never a fuss, and I had succeeded completely. I had made myself so effortless to overlook that I had disappeared. Nobody ignores a difficult woman. They ignore the one who never complains. I was 69 years old, and I had spent my entire adult life becoming invisible. And I had done every bit of it to myself. What I am about to tell you took me 4 decades to learn. I hope it takes you considerably less. My name is Margaret Walsh, 69 years old, retired after 34 years teaching 3rd grade at the same elementary school in Columbus, Ohio. I want you to understand what kind of woman I was, because the kind of woman I was is the whole point of this. I was the good one, the easy one, the one who never caused problems and never needed anything, and could always be counted on to absorb whatever the situation required of her without complaint. I learned early, the way girls of my generation learn most important things, through implication rather than instruction, through watching and adjusting rather than being told, that the highest compliment available to a woman was some version of, "She's so easy to get along with. She never makes a fuss. She never asks for much. She's just always there." I spent my entire adult life earning that compliment, and I earned it completely, thoroughly, at considerable cost. In 34 years of teaching, I never once declined an extra assignment. I covered for colleagues who called in sick, even on days I was not feeling well myself. I organized the holiday parties, the end-of-year luncheons, the gift collections for retiring staff, the Teacher Appreciation Week activities for other teachers, because someone had to do it, and someone always turned out to be me. I served on every committee I was asked to join. When the principal needed someone to take on the newest and most challenging students, the ones with behavioral difficulties, the ones other teachers quietly steered away from, the answer was always Margaret, because Margaret would say yes. Margaret did not make the situation harder. Margaret absorbed whatever was handed to her and kept going. I told myself this was dedication, love of the children, commitment to the profession, and some of it genuinely was. I am not interested in revising my own history into something simpler than it was. But I am honest enough now to say that a substantial part of it was fear. Fear that if I said no, I would be seen as selfish, not a team player, difficult. That the invisible architecture of being liked and relied upon, which I had constructed carefully over decades and maintained with constant, quiet effort, would develop a crack that I would never be able to repair. The thing about that fear is that it works. It keeps you saying yes. It keeps the architecture intact. What it does not do is tell you what the architecture is actually costing. At home, it was no different. I married Gerald when I was 26. He was a good man in all the ways that are obvious and easy to see. Faithful, steady, hardworking, honest. He did not raise his voice. He did not drink. He did not disappear. By the standards of what I had been taught to want, He was an excellent husband. What he was not, and what I never asked him to be, never indicated I needed him to be, was attentive to me in the specific, effortful way that I was attentive to him. Gerald's preferences were visible because Gerald expressed them. Mine were invisible because I had trained myself over years to keep them that way. He knew what he wanted for dinner because he said so. He knew where he wanted to spend vacations because he had opinions and expressed them. What Margaret wanted was never quite as legible because Margaret had spent decades making her wanting small and quiet and easy to miss. I planned 31 vacations around his schedule and his preferences. I attended 31 company Christmas parties and made pleasant conversation with his colleagues and their wives, and came home and loaded the dishwasher and went to bed and never once said, I would have liked to do something different this year. Not because the thought wasn't there, it was always there, but because saying it out loud would mean making a fuss. And I did not make fusses. That was my defining quality. That was what I was proud of. Our two children grew up watching their father's wants shape the household, and their mother's wants remain quietly unspoken. They did not choose to learn this. Children don't choose what they absorb. They absorb what is modeled. What was modeled every day for the entirety of their childhoods was that Margaret's needs were optional information. Nice to have if offered, not necessary to seek out. Both of them, as adults, replicated this without cruelty and without awareness. My son calls me primarily when he needs something. My daughter includes me in family events the way you include a reliable piece of furniture. Present, expected, unremarkable. I am not angry at them. I built this. I laid every brick myself over 40 years and handed them the blueprint. What they built from it is not their fault. My colleague Diane taught 4th grade in the classroom next to mine for 19 years. Diane was what the staff lounge called difficult. She said no to extra assignments without apologizing for the number. She told the principal directly when she disagreed with a policy decision. In the meeting, out loud, in front of other people, without waiting to express her concerns privately afterward where they would be easier to dismiss. She pushed back. She had opinions about her own classroom, and she expressed them clearly and defended them without apparent anxiety about how the defense was being received. She left at the end of her contracted hours. She did not organize holiday parties. The complaints about Diane were consistent, too blunt, not a team player, made things harder than they needed to be, difficult. I participated in some of those conversations. Quietly, always quietly. Just the murmured agreement of someone who wants to stay on the comfortable side of the room. I told myself I was simply being collegial. I told myself Diane could benefit from a little more diplomacy. What I was actually doing was resenting Diane for doing openly what I was too afraid to do at all, and using the social currency of the staff lounge to make her pay a small price for it because it cost me nothing and made the resentment slightly more manageable. Diane retired 2 years before I did. Her retirement party was attended by people who respected her. Not everyone liked her. No one who has edges is universally liked, but everyone in that room knew exactly who she was. She gave a short speech that was funny and direct and entirely identifiably herself. I sat in the back row and felt something I could not name precisely at the time. I can name it now. I felt like I had been doing it wrong for 34 years. And I felt, underneath the feeling I couldn't name, quieter but more insistent, that it was almost too late to do anything about it. 3 months later, on a Tuesday in October, I sat alone at a dinner table on my 41st anniversary and understood that almost was the operative word. I want to tell you what people-pleasing actually costs. Not the version everyone already knows, the vague acknowledgement that you get taken for granted, which people nod at sympathetically and do nothing about. The specific version, the one that took me until 69 to see without flinching. The first cost, when you never disagree, people stop registering you as a full person. You become a surface. A real person has edges. A real person occasionally pushes back, holds a position you have to navigate around, surprises you with an opinion you didn't expect. That friction, minor, manageable, human, is part of what makes another person present to you. It is evidence of a separate interior life. It is what makes you pay attention. Remove the friction and you remove the evidence. The person who never disagrees, never asks for anything, never introduces a complication, that person stops requiring your attention because there is nothing unexpected coming from their direction. They become predictable in the specific way that makes you stop reading carefully. You stop asking what they think because you know the answer will be whatever is easiest. You stop checking on their preferences because the outcome is reliable. You stop noticing because you have been trained not to look. I watched Gerald do this across decades and believed it was a failure of his attention when it was a success of my conditioning. I had taught him, with great consistency and over many years, that my answers were safe, that checking in with me would produce no friction, no surprise, no new information that required him to adjust. He was not being careless. He was responding accurately to everything I had shown him. There is a particular and very quiet loneliness in being known as someone who doesn't need much. People stop offering because you have never asked. They stop checking because you have never flagged the problem. They stop noticing because you have built a version of yourself specifically designed not to be noticed. And then you wonder, in the small hours of the night, why you feel so alone. It is the loneliness of your own construction, and it is one of the most complete kinds there is. The second cost. The self you suppress for long enough eventually stops surfacing. You lose access to it. This one I did not understand until after it had already happened. When I was in my 20s and early 30s, I had preferences. Genuine ones. Specific, strong, mine. I had a clear sense of what I wanted from my life, from my marriage, from my work. I can remember that version of myself. She had sharper edges and a louder internal voice, and a less managed relationship with other people's discomfort. She knew what she thought. I softened that version deliberately, continuously, over the following 35 years. Every time I chose the easy answer over the honest one. Every time I absorbed someone else's discomfort rather than allowing them to hold it themselves. Every time I smiled and said, "Whatever you prefer," instead of saying what I actually preferred. I was practicing, and practice produces exactly what it is supposed to produce. By my late 50s, I had become genuinely uncertain what I wanted from most situations. Not performing uncertainty, actually uncertain. The reflex of consulting my own preferences had atrophied from disuse, and in its place was a blankness that I kept interpreting as flexibility, and that was actually absence. I would stand in a restaurant and feel nothing when I looked at the menu. Not indifference, which has its own quality, but a genuine inability to locate a preference, because I had spent so long asking everyone else first that I had lost the habit of asking myself. Gerald would ask, "What do you feel like tonight?" And I would say, "Whatever you want." And I meant it, which was the problem. I was not performing deference. I had deferred for so long that the underlying want had gone quiet. When the voice inside you that says, "I want this, I do not want that," has been systematically overridden for long enough, it stops raising the subject. Not because it is gone, it is not gone, but because it has learned that raising the subject produces nothing. And even the internal voice eventually responds to its own conditioning. Diane, sitting next to me for 19 years, never lost that voice. She was the same person in the staff lounge as in her classroom. The same person with the principal as with the parents, as with the difficult child's difficult parent on a Tuesday afternoon. There was no gap between the version of herself she performed and the version she actually was, because she had declined to create one. I watched this for 19 years and called it bluntness and lack of self-awareness, when it was actually the rarest thing I have ever observed up close. A person who remained entirely herself, regardless of the social costs. I spent 19 years learning the wrong lesson from the right example. I thought, that's just how Diane is. It didn't occur to me that it was a choice she was making every day that I was also making, just in the opposite direction. The third cost. The resentment you absorb instead of express doesn't dissolve. It accumulates, and it will find its own way out. I believed for most of my adult life that I was not a resentful person. I was generous and patient. These things were true. What was also true, and what I refused to examine, was that beneath the generosity and the patience was a deposit of unexpressed resentment that had been growing for decades. All the yeses that should have been nos. All the preferences I had swallowed. All the quiet absorbing of other people's needs at the steady, invisible expense of my own. I had labeled each piece of it carefully. Generosity, flexibility, being the bigger person, choosing my battles. I had stacked them neatly and refused to look at the pile. The pile was substantial. Suppressed resentment does not stay suppressed. It migrates. Mine came out as a bone-deep tiredness that I attributed to age and the demands of the classroom and the general weight of a life fully lived. Never to the 40 years of sustained self-suppression that were actually generating it. It came out as a flatness in my marriage that I could feel but couldn't locate the source of. A distance between me and my children that I explained to myself as the natural drift of grown adults with their own lives. What it did not come out as for 40 years was words. I never said, I am tired of this. I never said, I would like something different. I never gave the resentment language because giving it language would have required me to acknowledge it existed. And acknowledging it existed would have required me to do something about it. And doing something about it would have meant making a fuss. The bill came due on a Tuesday in October at a table set for two with one person at it. I was not tired because I was 69. I was tired because I had been carrying for 40 years the accumulated weight of everything I had decided not to say. And I had been carrying it alone, in silence, and calling the caring virtue. I am 69 years old. For the first time in my adult life, I am what people would call difficult. Not unkind, not indifferent to others, not careless with the people I love. Difficult in the specific sense that I now have visible edges. I express preferences out loud, in full sentences without editing them first into something softer. I say no to things I don't want to do, and I let the no stand without a paragraph designed to cushion the landing for whoever is receiving it. I disagree when I disagree, and I allow the disagreement to exist in the room without rushing to resolve it before the other person is fully uncomfortable. This has required adjustment from the people around me. I want to be honest about that. The conversation I had with Gerald about the anniversary dinner and about the 30 years before it was the most uncomfortable exchange we had shared in 2 decades. I told him about the meals I had cooked and the preferences I had suppressed and the way I had made myself smaller and quieter and easier and what that had cost me over time. He listened without becoming defensive, which I had not fully expected and which is a thing I will always respect him for. He said, I didn't know. I said, I know. I didn't tell you. He said, you should have. I said, yes. It was not a comfortable conversation. Nothing was smoothed over at the end of it. Nothing was wrapped up neatly. But it was real in a way that almost nothing between us had been in years. Something in the structure of our marriage shifted after that conversation. Not dramatically, but measurably. He asked me what I want now. Not always, not perfectly, but consistently enough that I notice. And I tell him, which is a thing I had not done in so long that doing it felt, the first few times, almost physically strange. My daughter went through a period of finding me more difficult in saying so. I told her I understood and that I was going to continue anyway. My son, who calls primarily when he needs something, received a no from me for the first time in his adult life and was visibly surprised by it. Neither of these conversations was comfortable. Both of them were necessary. Both of them produced, slowly and without fanfare, a slightly different quality of relationship, one where I am present as a person rather than a resource. Here is what I know now. I am going to say it as plainly as I can. People do not cherish what costs them nothing. This is not cynicism. It is a description of how attention works. The things we value most are the things that required something from us to have. Effort, adjustment, navigation, real engagement. A relationship that asks nothing of you because the other person has made themselves entirely frictionless, that relationship has no weight in it. The other person is not fully real to you in the way that someone who occasionally complicates things is real. You are not in relationship with them. You are in the habit of them. When you make yourself easy, you make yourself forgettable. And when you make yourself forgettable for long enough, you discover that the people you made yourself easy for have no particular practice of choosing you, because you have never required a choice. You were simply always there, always available, always fine, and always quietly alone with it. The woman in your life who gets called too much, too direct, too hard to get along with, look at her again with honest eyes. She probably has a clear, unambiguous sense of who she is. She probably has real relationships because the people who stayed with her stayed knowing exactly what they were getting. And that means they actually chose her. What she has that you may not have is the experience of being genuinely known. Not managed, not assumed, known. I am not asking you to manufacture conflict. I am not asking you to stop caring about the people around you. I am asking you to stop making yourself smaller for their comfort. I am asking you to say the thing you have been editing out of your sentences for years, to order what you actually want, to decline what you actually don't want without building a case, to let there be a moment of friction and to let the other person hold their own discomfort just this once instead of you absorbing it automatically. You will learn quickly which relationships can hold a real version of you. The ones that cannot, the ones that require your invisibility in order to function smoothly. Those were not what you believed them to be. It is better to know now while you still have time to build something different. Diane sent me a card when I retired. 2 words inside. It said, "Finally." I laughed for the first time in longer than I could easily remember. Not because the word was funny, because someone had been watching clearly enough to say it, because I had been known across a partition wall and 19 years of shared hallways by someone who recognized the shape of what I had been carrying. That is what you give away when you make yourself invisible. Not just the acknowledgement, not just the credit, not just the anniversary dinners that someone remembers and the preferences that someone asks about. You give away the experience of being actually, specifically known. And that, being seen clearly by another person at this stage of life, after everything, is the only thing that still seems to matter. Tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you've been swallowing for so long you've almost stopped noticing it's there? Because I think you know exactly what it is. I think you've known for a while.